Right. Thank you to the to our moderator for the introductions, and hello, Yamini and Rajoshi. For the audience out there, Yamini and Rajoshi have started software companies that are scaling dramatically globally, and they'll tell their own stories in a second. Just want to set the context for this session right here. We've seen over the last few years that a lot of companies from India, startups from India, have started targeting international markets. I published a blog a few weeks ago where I looked at sort of the high value companies in India, and it felt like about 30% of them are targeting international markets for impact. And within that 30%, the leading edge is SaaS companies. And Yamini and Rajoshi represent SaaS companies, and so we can talk about that. But there are other sectors also that are following, including B2B services and marketplaces, crypto, financial services, and so on. And so there's a lot of exciting sort of tailwind here behind Indian companies going global. But without further ado, wanted to maybe hand it over to Yamini for a couple of minutes. I think Yamini would be helpful to hear about how you got into this business, the key insight, and then we can talk about the international aspect of it after that.
Hi, I'm Yamini. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Vymo. Vymo is an intelligent sales engagement platform. We help salespeople within large sales teams mimic best practices on a day-to-day basis. I used to work at McKinsey before this. Most of my work was on sales and marketing transformation with large enterprises. And typically, the problem statement was to improve productivity and outcomes, sales and revenue outcomes. And what we realized was that we really had no information on what salespeople or customer teams were doing on the ground, especially in large distributed sales teams. And without knowing what folks were doing, it was very tough to figure out how to move the needle. Like if you have only 5% lead conversion, what happened to 95 that did not convert? This is easy in a call center kind of a setting, but it's not easy when you are running an insurance company with 60,000 agents spread across the country, etc. So Wymo was built to layer on top of CRMs and solve this problem, right? And we strongly believe that where people were willing to commit millions of dollars into CRMs and millions of dollars into consultants like McKinsey to solve this, it's a solution that could be standardized, and tech is the right way to do it.
Got it. Maybe one more question before we go to Rajoshi. Yamini, in terms of your background, it feels very relevant in terms of you understood the problem, you saw the problem up front and center in a sense. How did you decide that you wanted to go and solve this problem? What was the impetus behind that? You could have advised, I'm sure 10 other companies to go solve it. What was your sort of what gave you escape velocity from McKinsey to being a founder?
I think I kind of had the itch to do something on my own for like around that time frame, for a year around that time frame, and there were many different ideas I was debating. I think my husband was the wise one who said, like, do a framework 2x2 axis. What are you really good at, and what will make you money? Right, and that this is something that I'd done for 5 years, 20 plus projects, and I really believed that I was myself frustrated that I was repeating myself like a parrot everywhere on what needs to get done, and I was really frustrated that I was in touch with my clients, had a great relationship. I think one thing that I keep telling my team even now is know your customer, whether you're an engineering, like it's easy for support and customer teams to know the customer, but tougher for design engineering teams to just pick up the phone and speak with their customers and end users, but do it. Because when you know the customer, there are so many ideas you come up with on not just what you're doing now, but just like reference points for you in the future. That was the case. I was in touch with my customers over years, and it was frustrating to see like basic common sense kind of stuff becoming so tough to execute at scale. And our sales playbooks, like literally these were handbooks, right? Physical printed copies that would be given to salespeople on, this company's way of selling. That was the title. And they were just sitting there catching dust. And it just felt like this needed to be solved. Yeah.
So if I hear you correctly, it's sort of a combination of deep domain knowledge, and deep frustration with the problem being repeated again and again. And of course, your idea and your energy to go and start this thing, sort of this
Yeah, I'm also a
combination.
computer science major. Yeah, Venkat and I were at BITS Pilani Computer Science together.
Yeah,
Right. So the natural way to solve any problem, it's tough in consulting. You anchor yourself to something. For me, the anchor was not like coaching and running training programs for 10,000 people in 50 cities, etc. For me, the anchor always became, solve it through tech. Tech is the only thing that can scale and ensure consistency repeatedly. That was probably because of my background.
understood. No, thank you, Yami. That is wonderful. Thank you. Rajoshi, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think I come from a research background, and I went to university and studied something called computational biology, which was very new back in the day. I and then I was in research for a little bit and realized that I would probably see light. The work that I was doing would probably see light of day many years later. So I ended up sort of switching careers, and I jumped into something which was very different from what I was doing, which was I had a computer science sort of background as well. I did as part of computational biology. Uh, Computer science is a part of it. So I actually went and taught programming to a whole bunch of entrepreneurs who wanted to start companies but came from different backgrounds. And that was very new for me because I hadn't worked with entrepreneurs and I hadn't thought of starting a company before that. So that was my sort of foray into a different field, just working with extremely spirited individuals who wanted to start companies, and I did that for a year, and that's sort of when that was probably the first time I thought of starting a company. So yeah, that's kind of like my journey, just carrying on from like what Yamini was saying, and so. Um, uh, I met my co-founder soon after I finished this, 1 year stint at this incubator, and we both happened to be at this, at the same stage in life where we wanted to start something, and we wanted to just like get started and sort of, yeah, basically we were like, let's see which one idea that we both feel passionately about and kind of get into it. And we actually started out with something very different initially and started building an application and discovered that the process of building an application for somebody who's just coming in, it was just there were many things to learn if you had to build a web or a mobile app, which was production ready, and there was just a lot of things to learn, lots of domain expertise needed, and it just felt that it takes such a long time and there has to be an easier way. So we stumbled into our own problem while building a different startup and
Hmm.
realized that we wanted to solve this, but at that point we didn't know how we were going to go about it. So our first company that we started together was a consulting company where we just went and built a lot of applications for a lot of people. And the whole time we had a small team looking at what could be abstracted out of every different application to see what are the commonalities. And so we did that for a few years, with this sort of services angle and a product angle, and looked at sort of seeing like different stages of companies, different industries, what was common. And because we started adopting a lot of technology very early, it quickly took us into enterprise even in our consulting days because we had a lot of domain expertise in like in technologies that people were not really using in production. So I guess like our consulting days gave us visibility into a lot, both business problems and sort of tech problems that are common across different types of companies. And so we took 3.5 years into that. We were like, okay, we have a product that looks like we wanted to go from solving, it taking 6 months to build an application to like maybe a week. That's kind of what we thought, and we got to that right with our own team. And so that's when we said, okay, this is the time for us to take this product to market as a product company. And so that's kind of when we started Hasura. So for those of you following in, Hasura, basically it's an open source product it's an open source product that is for developers, and it solves the data access problem. And what I mean by that is, if you're somebody building an application, or if you're a business who's building an application, typically you need to access data that is stored in multiple different places. Your data could be in databases, it could be in third-party services, it could be in APIs that different teams write. And usually accessing that data ends up taking a lot of time lots of domain expertise, a lot of communication, lots of different tooling. And so Hasura just kind of comes in as a drop-in replacement there. You take Hasura, you point it to wherever your different data wherever your data is stored, and you get APIs with access control that what I mean by access control is like granular security that
Yeah.
your application developers can use very quickly and sort of build production ready applications. And sort of we've
Rajoshi,
seen our, yeah.
just one final question there, and maybe a one line on this. Sort of, how would you describe the scale you're at for the audience? Just how would you describe the scale? I don't know how you talk
What do
about
you
it.
mean by scale?
Just number of developers, or whichever way you think
Oh,
about the scale the business has reached
oh,
publicly.
right. Yeah. So I think we went from 0 to 2 million downloads of Hasura in the first year. Then we went from 2 to 100 million in the second year. Last year, we went from 100 million to 400 million downloads of Hasura, the open source product. Yeah. So we've sort of seen rapid scaling, one of the fastest open source products in the space that we're in. So that's kind of been our journey. We sort of stumbled into it a little bit, I think.
No, that's interesting. A different way of coming to a problem, which is you discover the problem while doing something else, in a sense, and then you sort of double down on that. Sort of maybe the story behind Slack is like that. They were a gaming company, and they discovered sort of this way of communicating that they created, much more value with. So very, very interesting. Yamini, just back to you very quickly. A sentence on how you talk about scale and what scale you reach as a company, again, just for the audience to calibrate.
Yeah, a bunch of different ways for us. Breaking into new markets was a very big deal. We had started off in India. We are a large enterprise. We target very large enterprises, some of the top banks and insurers within the countries that we operate in. So it was important for us to get to newer and newer markets rather than get to like mid market or lower mid market as a segment. We're present today in 8 countries, the most recent additions being US and Japan, which are the largest markets in the world. So that's huge for us. There is an equivalent of Fortune 100 that we also track. It's different Fortune 100s across different countries. But for example, in our oldest market in India, we work with 7 out of the 10 top insurers, right, which is key for us. And our newest markets in US and Japan, we actually already work with the number one PNC players in both the markets. So that is one way in which we measure. We serve 250,000 end sales users on Vymo. That's another angle for scale. The team is about 400 strong. That's another angle. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And of course, revenue, which we will not talk about here.
Well, fantastic scale, and for both of you, and I think there's going to be several lessons about this that we can sort of bring out for the aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience to learn about. Maybe one that we dive into a little bit is, when one is sitting in India, first time entrepreneur, sort of we almost, the future looks bright, of course, but the future also looks daunting. There's several, hills and peaks to climb ahead of you. One of those hills is going international, quote unquote. Now, there's a lot to unpack under that, but maybe one question for you: what did you see in the international market? How did you figure out how to go international? I know it's a broad question. Were there one or two developers, Rajoshi, in your case? Were there one or two enterprises, Yamini, in your case, that sort of pulled you into this? Did you have to travel there, wherever, which other markets to figure this out? Did you figure this out sitting here in India? Tell us a little bit about that, from India to global sort of leap. How did you make it? And maybe within that, any sort of guidance for founders, what would you do if you were starting again and wanted to accelerate that India to global transition?
Yeah.
Maybe
I,
Yamini,
I can go first. Yeah,
Rajesh, go
I
ahead.
can go first. Okay, so our GTM, which is our go-to market approach, is to sell top-down into large enterprises. So we work with, I mean, I'll take a few examples in the Indian context so it's relatable. Like in India, our customers include in banking, HDFC and ICICI banks. In insurance, it is SBI Life, Max Life, like all the big ones that you can name, right? So for us, speaking with the head of these lines of business unit heads, or the CXOs, is the go-to-market approach, is how our sales cycle works, right? And then they deploy to the 5, 10, 20,000 people in their teams, right? We might break into one team and then we expand to other teams after we have proven success, etc. Now, given that is the sales approach, there is 2, 3 life stages for us as far as the country is concerned. There is a rapid validation, which we've done on the back of, I'll tell you our approach, it will be different if your segment and your buyer is different. Right? In our case, rapid validation phase for a few months would hit the peak event cycle, which is July or September, etc., or Feb, March, and go to industry conferences, pitch ourselves, have like try to have 20, 30, 50, 100 conversations, depending on the size of the scale of these conferences. We'd actually invest there. Putting up a booth, getting a speaker slot in this events might cost you 10, 20, 25,000, but it's way cheaper than hiring a person on ground and trying to figure out the messaging, right? Where else will you get 50 conversations in one day? Sometimes it's about what is the biggest way to, like, what's the stack in this country and how do we need to position ourselves? How sometimes, like in markets like Japan, it actually became about user experience. The fact that people wanted something like that, literally, like at the click of a button, magic happens, right? And we piled on that want and need. So that is the rapid validation phase. While we are doing this, obviously we are interviewing in parallel, right? Initially, early days, the mistake we made was after this phase, we were a bootstrap company in our early days. Then we raised up for the first time, right? And we were probably being a little bit too frugal and trying to fly in, fly out, or we assumed that that would work because at that stage we had seen other companies recommend that, right? Fly in, fly out, and try to win the first few customers. We actually won the first logo in most of these markets doing that, but it wasn't scalable after that because we didn't have on ground teams to deploy, implement, like handhold the customer on customer success, right? So suddenly we have a client in Indonesia, but no one's speaking Bahasa, and the sale can happen in English, but the success happens in Bahasa, and suddenly you have a problem, right? And it even in English speaking countries, suddenly like you're not on the time zone, right?
Yeah.
So our lesson has been therefore that to the extent that you can invest, and in large enterprise, this actually required us to go down the funding route quite a bit because large enterprise, our sales cycles are 7 to 8 months, marketing cycles are 4, 5 months, breaking into a market, hiring a team is 3 to 4 months. So that's like 18 months before you see revenue from a new market, right? And you have to invest into the cycle. And the paybacks are very quick after that, 8 months, 9 months, etc. for us. But we did go down the funding route, and therefore we said every market starts with someone who can play the sales role, but also the customer success role. So the initial multi-hacking generalists.
No, that's very helpful. Rajoshi, over to you for the same question. Maybe I'll add one piece on that, which is, you could have gone after enterprises, I would imagine. You were doing that in the previous business, I think you just mentioned. How do you think about going from enterprise to developer? And then maybe a couple of thoughts on learnings from how do you go to market for developers from India to the world? Is it just natural, just because it's developers, it's online 100% and self-serve, or is there some nuance to it because you're in India?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think even in the previous company, sort of, at that point, enterprises happened kind of through a network effect at that stage, right? So we had only seen the bottom up growth prior to that. And so now switching to Hasura, like you rightly said, for developers, right? Um, if you're speaking to developers kind of anywhere, they're picking up things online, they're looking at things, they're trying it out. So we have a very bottom up sort of go to market motion, which sort of which is like seeding the community and then layering on sales, which is more sort of that bottom up. Like there's a technical champion that sort of introduces us to somebody in the buyer in the organization. So for us, the way
Just
that
a
works is,
nuance there, Rajoshi.
yeah,
Seems like what you're saying is you might end up with an enterprise account,
yeah,
but you start bottoms up
yeah,
and you let people, developers, and then you might end up with, I don't know what the number is, but
yeah.
a 6-digit, 7-digit contract with an enterprise at the end of some cycle.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, so that's basically like that's how it works for us, where, we invest a lot in, content, developer tooling, like developer awareness, right? Which is very driven by, in the pre-COVID times, meetups, local meetups, and content and technical blog posts, and like really peek under the hood of like, how is this thing built, right? So we did a lot of that, and that sort of, even when we launched, we kind of went up on Hacker News, we were trending on GitHub globally, and that, and then deeply investing in developer experience. If you want developers to discover your product and that being some and recommending the product needs, like, the documentation, the examples for them to go from zero to success needs to be as short as possible. And they should know what they get out of it. It can't be terribly complicated, right? Like, there's a point solution. What's the happy path? So we really invested in that developer experience. And that's what led to that instant sort of flywheel, right? Hacker News to GitHub to, developers talking to each other. And then we kind of kept repeating that cycle. And so that's all we did for the first few months, right? And then we saw that developers globally started adopting it. And remember, we're open source, so we don't actually have emails. It's not SaaS, right? And so then we started getting, like, we had our first enterprise customer reach out to us on our website chat maybe like 3 months after we launched, saying, hey, we've been using this, we would like to talk to somebody. And then we realized that with open source software, if it's in mission critical applications, they'll reach out to you. You can't make a large deployment and not know who to call if something goes wrong. And so we just made sure we opened up all channels of community. Like, we just made sure that people would never be lost as to how they can contact us, right? We just made sure there was a website chat because we didn't have email. Website chat, there were just like multiple places where we would be like, if you ask a question, we'll be there, right? And that's sort of how, we started getting our first few enterprise inquiries. And we start talking to them. And so that's sort of the early stages. And then moving on, kind of what the model really becomes is you sort of build a community, and the community sort of starts raising their hand to when they want you in an enterprise conversation. And for us, we naturally started seeing those conversation early days in North America. So we started having, that was where our, when we hired our first, salesperson. This was almost, I think this was 6 months after we launched our enterprise product, before which we already had a few, deals. And then we hired that team in North America then, and then, there's on the ground. And similarly now, as we think of expanding to other markets, it's not that we don't have customers in other markets, but we serve, but it's the sales team is physically located in the US. But now as we go on, it'll be like, where do you want to develop a community? Actually invest more in the community resources there, be present in local meetups. Very similar kind of to what Yamini is saying about like events, right? But we talk about more like, um, yeah, just like local meetups and things like that, and then sort of build that community. So very similar, but almost like almost a little bit more B2C than B2B in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because you're reaching developers who are more like almost like more consumers than a business. So it's interesting. The nuance there is like B2D is kind of in between B2C and B2B in a way.
You said you have customers in India and then customers, in the US and Japan. How different are requirements? I'm talking about a broader level for the audience who are in lots of different sectors and looking at different, like, what's the difference, if any, and what's the similarities in any between requirements and buying behavior, India to the West?
Yeah. For us, what we realize, at least in our space, it might be different depending on the product solution space. In our space, we felt the pain and need was the same. Sales leaders just did not have visibility into what was happening on ground. The life stage at which customers were might be different. People had overinvested in CRMs. Some people had gone and built something on top, tried to solve this. But typically, even that was a difference between early adopters of tech, folks who try to solve via tech versus folks who are not tech savvy, right? And we saw that like the number one, the fastest adopters for Vymo are people who have already tried to build this on their own, right? And these turned out to be the number one banks and insurers in every place that we went. And they were the first to say, you know what, we completely understand what we are talking about. And either we are in the middle of this experiment or we are about to start and let's just buy Vymo. Let's try Vymo, right? So for us, strangely, like there was a lot of reason to believe that, hey, markets are going to be different, people's needs are going to be different, this won't fly. But we realized that, I mean, over learning, we learned that the need and gap was there. The tech stack was different. What that means and how we execute is Asian markets pull you towards more layers of the stack. Once they trust a vendor and something has worked for them, they're ecstatic, right? And they want you to solve more and more problems. And it's very important for you not to get pulled into things which are beyond your boundaries as a product. US, on the other hand, recognizes the fact that there are different point solutions and they interoperate and they should be solving these problems, right? We've still seen some of the largest customers, even markets like US and Japan, ask us if we could do something else. And therefore, we actually train our teams, our solutioning teams to explain, to understand the full stack, point them towards the right solutions which are integrated with Vymo. Right, rather than try to solve everything yourself. It's attractive to be all for the customer because there's money in that, but it takes you on a very, you start losing bandwidth to go deep in your own problem space, and then someone
Mhm.
else can do a better job than you, right?
So
So
just to paraphrase what you're saying there, you're saying India and Asian markets, they want you to go across layers of the stack. They want sort of more and more. Whereas in the US, people know the layers and they sort of slot you into
yeah.
the right layer. If they ask you for the layers, you integrate and you sort of point them
Yeah,
to.
even in Asia, there are solutions for every space. There are like thousands as companies solving problems, right? People are not, they do not have access to enterprises, so enterprises may not be aware of some of these solutions. And therefore, we have trained our team to understand the stack, know who plays in every layer, validate them, build an integrated journey, and surface this to the customer rather than do it ourselves.
Understood. Understood. One last question. I know we're up against the hour over here, but maybe one last question, which I would be remiss not asking in sort of a panel targeting Indian founders, which is what is the India advantage to that you each are leveraging respectively to build your business? And you're competing on a global stage. You're competing against competitors in the US and Europe and everywhere else. One of the unique aspects of what you do is you've started off with an Indian employee base, and you were both, I think, based in India early on in the evolution of the business. What is the advantage at scale of having started in India and having operations in India? I know Freshworks, when they went public in their IPO document, talked about 24/7 support and many other things. But what is it for each of your cases?
Yeah. I can take that. For us, I think early on, I think it gives you a little bit room to stumble and write yourself, I feel, because the initial costs are a little bit lower than what you would need to probably start something similar in the US, right? That's I would say what the initial advantage was. Like we were not doomed to die because we were figuring it out. Like for example, our first customer was not large enterprise. That was our third customer, and we had to learn that lesson that mid market is painful for what we were trying to solve. The sales teams were not big enough for us to have the data to run, the winning behavior learning from data itself, right? So stuff like that. So that stumble trip phase was useful to do in a market where cost base is low and you have a little bit more longevity there. Today I genuinely, like, we have fantastic, we have like 140% plus net revenue retention, we have 85% gross margin, we believe it'll go to 93% once all our DCs across the world hit scale, etc. Our unit economics are very good. I don't know if that is an India advantage. Having said that, because I do believe there are companies in the US that operate at similar. Now, obviously, there's not an exact Vymo, but if you take Viva, I think it'll come up with fairly good unit economics on its sale because it's large enterprise, it's vertical cloud, and, So and I think the way we pay off is like the cost. Yes, probably there is a slightly lower cost. I would say only slightly lower cost at this point on
Yeah,
talent here. But they're not as experienced as someone who has done five SaaS companies already and lived their life in the whole Siebel Salesforce era, lived their careers there. So they're not coming to Wimo saying, I know exactly how this happens, right? Across all segments, there are segments like product marketing, which we had to like build from scratch in this market, right? Whereas you don't have to invest that much time and energy in ramping up talent. I believe in markets which are more mature on software and SaaS, and micro segments like sales enablement, right? So I think that's where the trade-off kind of flattens, and we probably have slightly more headcounts than US, but similar unit economics overall.
got it. Thank you. Rajoshi?
I would say very similar in in the early stages to really go through our journey and like figure that out. I think it gave us more room because we were like I said, we stumbled into it, right? So I think definitely there the cost advantage, um, uh, gave us that room to sort of really find our product market fit, right? And I think the second thing for us is, I think we found it like engineering and product teams. Uh, you know, we have engineering and product teams in India, and I think we've just found, the ability to attract really good talent has been a huge, more from a like yeah, just more from the fact that we're there and we're able to tap into these markets and the people in India. That's kind of been the big advantage from the ability to hire, I would say, right? So we do have. So today we're very distributed. We're across 20 countries. We have equal number of people in the US and India and the rest of and then uh, a little bit rest of the world. So we are building teams in different countries as well. But I think engineering product talent, just because of the background, a lot of the early team comes from, has been a huge advantage for us in India.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much. I know we're up at the end of time for the session, but Rajoshi and Yamini, thank you so much for your um, the inspiration you provide to founders in the audience who are listening, and also that you've succeeded so much in the last several years, and really are bellwethers for the market for all of us to look at. So best wishes for the journey ahead, and thank you so much for your time today.